Hi folks, welcome to another episode of My Life with Robert Burns. Douglas McKenzie and Jim Thompson here again. We are going to be talking to another of our cronies from around the Burns world. Hi Jim, how you doing?
Doing great, Douglas. Hi everybody.
Today our guest is a young man who's become very well known for his interpretation of Burns and also as a performance poet in his own right. Cronies everywhere, please welcome Simon Lamb.
Hello, thank you for having me. Hello both.
Hi Simon. Simon, we always start off by asking the same question. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Right, well, here we go. I feel quite excited and giddy on these things. So one of the things I've enjoyed with screens is working out how to convey that and not feeling constrained in these boxes. But we'll give it a go because I think we're all getting used to it now. Thank you both for inviting me on. And where to start with me? Well, I have a strange accent. That's where I'm going to start. And it's because my parents are English, and indeed I was born in England. But at the age of 1, we moved up to Scotland. So I now have this sort of bizarre mishmash of a voice that I'm sure we'll end up talking about a few times through this. I went to school, as one does, and at school, one of the things I really excelled at was maths. But on the other side of that, I was always very, very creative, and I loved the creative side of things right through from primary school. And I would say one of the first things I remember is writing a short story. And I remember this will be sort of primary 2, primary 3, I remember being invited to the front of the class because I'd written the story at home. And I was invited to come and sit on the teacher's chair and tell the story to the rest of the class. And I think that was my first moment of, wow, I love telling stories. I love performing. And I've always remembered that. And I still upstairs have the original copy of that story. And I'm sure I will always keep that tight. So with that in mind, I went through primary school and indeed secondary school. And then in secondary school, I found a love of theatre to expand from the stories and the things that I've been writing. And I loved performing on stage as part of them and also staging them. I directed several shows while I was at secondary school, not only directing these shows, but also performing in them and writing them. I think that's where I really started to find a love of theatre, was in writing my own shows, particularly for the Scout group I was part of. I think in the time that I was a teen, I wrote and directed 3 Scout shows, including, nicely, one for their centenary in 2007, which is something I've always remembered and will keep close, writing something that became part of history of that company. So then after secondary school, with such a creative background, it seems only natural, of course, that I would go on to do a maths degree. Yeah, it's the sort of the eternal what if. I ended up going to St Andrews to do a maths degree, and I loved St Andrews. I'm not sure I can say the same about the maths degree, but, you know, I gave it my all and I came out good guns at the end. One of my favorite parts, though, right at the end, when you're invited to do a talk about your subject. And that was the area where I really felt that I was like, this is my moment to shine. So I staged my final year talk in maths as a comedy stand-up one-man performance routine. And I just had the most fun with it. It was called A Mathematical Fable in Approximately 21 Words. And in fact, that's where I get the approx 21 words of my YouTube title from that. It was great fun. And I was invited back by the Math Society to do a public airing of this. And I was like, finally, my loves of theatre and my how good I was at maths have combined. So I got something out of it. After that, then I took a year out and I went and worked in Sainsbury's to support with some money. And while I was doing that, I got some experience in schools. I had worked in a couple of schools over in Fife, and I got the bug for teaching. I think I realized quite early on that I not only enjoyed it, but there's something so fulfilling about it. And I know that there's quite a few people speaking at the moment of what more can you get out of life than life coming back at you? And I think that's a great place to see that, is in teaching. So I definitely got the teaching bug there. So I did a couple of days in schools that year and also worked in Sainsbury's. And this is where the story starts to collide into Robert Burns, because I'd been there sort of 5 or 6 months and the Christmas party came around and the HR department called me and said, hello there, we hear you're quite into theatre and performing. Would you like to MC the staff Christmas party with some entertainment, a bit of cabaret or something? So myself and another colleague, a very good female singer, performed various things, little quirky poems and comedy routines for the staff Christmas party. And it was a hoot. And I wrote a little verse for Sainsbury's Christmas, and just 8 lines or so, and they filmed it and put it on YouTube. And it was great. We loved it. And a few weeks later, I received a call from the manager again and said, we've got this great idea. We want you to dress up at the front of the shop and just do poems. We want you to be Robert Burns. And I was like, oh my goodness gracious me. Partly because, as I said earlier, my accent has been something that's played a lot in my life. And in primary schools, Robert Burns gave me the book. Oh, I couldn't stand it. I didn't get it. It was that sort of wall of nonsense that I couldn't get because my tongue, it didn't suit my tongue. I didn't get it. I didn't understand what was going on. We were just thrown and bombarded with these words. And truth be told, I really had quite a mockery taken out of me for my voice when I was younger. And it was only in the last 2 years or so that I realized that on occasion I was quite badly bullied for this, quite physically badly bullied for my voice. So to be told in my job, hey, we'd like you to be Robert Burns doing Burns poetry, I was like, oh, yikes-a-rooney. I really panicked. And I did what I guess everyone does in this day and age, which is run to Google. And I Googled Burns poems, Burns performances. And I stumbled upon, maybe you're familiar, the comedian Karen Dunbar. Yeah. I stumbled upon Karen Dunbar's performance from many years ago now of Tam O'Shanter, and an abridged version of Tam O'Shanter. And I just watched it on repeat for the night. And I watched it and I watched it. And I just thought, oh, wow. And it was a half and half. She was on the stage, but she also was on location filming as well. And I was like, I'm starting to get this. Now, I've already said that I'm really interested in writing. And I said to them, okay, Sainsbury's, I'll do it if and only if I can have a play with the words. I want to rewrite it. And that was how, less than a week after that first meeting, 8 times in one day, I ended up standing at the front of Sainsbury's Presswick performing Tam O'Shanter set in a Sainsbury's store, which basically revolves around the idea at the halfway point where the lights go out for the chase, the entire chase sequence is then based in Sainsbury's. And I love that it's captured online forever. So that performance from 2014, that would have been, that 2014 performance is now captured forever. And it is my first ever performance of Tam O'Shanter. And I haven't got a clue really what I'm speaking, but that was it. I started to fall in love with that poem. Both of you are big fans of the poem, I know. And there's just so much in it, you know, there's such a good story. And it went down well, and they invited me back at Valentine's Day, said, would you do something? So I ended up doing Romeo and Juliet set in a Sainsbury's store. That went well. At Easter, they said, would you do something? And I did Humpty Dumpty set in a Sainsbury's store, which was great. What a great experience of poetry, you know, what a bizarre origin story. And that really gave me a hook then into performance poetry. And from that year on, and almost every year since, groups have asked me to come in and rewrite the poem for their group. And Scouts, I have done numerous ones now. I think I'm on 4 or 5 different versions of Tam O'Shanter for various Scout groups. And probably my favorite was that year. And I was invited to the headquarters, and it was their big annual Scout Burns supper. And I'm not sure I've ever been more nervous in my life. The top table had all sorts of dignitaries. We had BBC people there. We had the person who brought the Glasgow Commonwealth Games bid, all of these big people there. And there was me with my Tam O'Shanter set for Scouts and headquarters. And I just fell in love with it. So I've done it since for curling clubs. When I went up and lived in Caithness, I ended up rewriting it as though it was going up the Caithness coast. And that, I suppose, was the turning point for me. I know we'll chat more about the Burns stuff, but that was the turning point for Burns with me. Teaching, I ended up going into teaching, and I got my teaching job up near Wick in a wee town called Leibster. And I was up there for nearly 4 years. A gorgeous place, absolutely beautiful, the most beautiful place I've ever lived. Imagine having, 15 miles of the North Coast 500 to drive as my commute every day. It was just beautiful, and I'll never forget that place, ever. But I also realized I wouldn't stay there forever. It didn't provide quite enough of a lifestyle. So while I loved it and I'll cherish it forever, time came to move on. And at that point, I also dropped down from full-time teaching to take on a more balanced approach with a career, but also trying to pursue all the performance and writing that I wanted to do as well. And it was that year, which was 2019, that I decided to go ahead and self-publish this little book called Cathedral Sky, which was a wee pamphlet of my own words. And at the same time as doing that, I also edited a book that I did for a school called We Are the Words. And both of these came out at the end of 2019. And I accompanied that with a tour around Scotland. So I went to Dundee, I went to Aberdeen, up to Caithness, I played a gig in Ayr, St Andrews, and even the Scottish Poetry Library over in Edinburgh. And it was wonderful. I was so excited. I just was on top of the world. I felt I finally had the balancing act starting. I was starting to blossom into myself, I felt, for various reasons, that included. And that was at the very end of 2019. And at the start of 2020, I remember that new year feeling so exciting. I had that new year in Manchester and thinking, yeah, I think I finally found me. And then 2020 had other ideas. and that's the timing of things, isn't it, I suppose?
Yeah,
and
certainly is.
We all know what happened then in 2020.
Yeah. But before we move on to talk about 2020 and beyond, and before we start getting into your inspiration, or whether or not Burns was an inspiration to you, let's talk a bit more about the younger days. You came to Prestwick as a 1-year-old. Where did you come from?
Yeah, so we were based, Cheshire is the sort of the family home, and Middlewich is where we lived. All the family are still down there. It was only my parents came up, and that was for Dad's work in the aviation industry, which he left us last year. And so I guess I had that sort of childhood, without the extended family. So it was always a treat to go down and see them and to experience them that way.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you about our next episode of our podcast. We're going to be interviewing a guy who is doing some missionary work for Burns in Cheshire. So I think you'll be interested in that one.
Yeah.
But I won't tell you any more at this stage.
Okay.
So primary school, is that in Prestwick too?
Yeah, Heathfield Primary School. That's where I was for my schooling, and then the secondary school in Prestwick. Yep.
Yeah, is that Prestwick Academy?
Indeed it is, yeah.
Right, okay, good. And which university did you study at?
So my master's degree was over at the University of St Andrews over on the East Coast, and then my teaching was back here in Ayr at the UWS, University of the West of Scotland.
I should have listened more closely, and I would have known it was St Andrews because you mentioned that earlier on.
We're just giving it like little plugs, because it is quite nice to say you went to St Andrews. I mean, it was a great place, and what a beautiful town that is. I've been very lucky, I think, to have lived on the West Coast, the East Coast, and the North Coast, all in beautiful places. I've only ever lived on the sea, and it's beautiful.
Yeah. And scouting is a big interest. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your involvement there?
So scouting I've always been part of. So, and I think in many ways, you follow that through, don't you? So I think I've accidentally still ended up part of it. So that's right through from Beavers, which I guess is age 6. And even then I remember performance opportunities, and an old Beaver leader always used to refer to this little moment where I walked up as a tiny little beaver and stood on the little box, the little crate they'd put, and performed for the parents. So even back then, I was trying to embrace my performance roots. I love the adventure scouting offers, and I love the opportunities. In many ways, I was quite quiet in the Scouts, but there were still so many opportunities for quiet people there. I think sometimes we think of it as just a very adventurous organization. And I think it's a great one for moving with the times. It's so open and inclusive now, and I love that about the Scouts. And that's one of the reasons I'm still involved. I've seen so many kids now go through it. And if anything, I think I'm probably right in saying that I get more out of it as an adult, perhaps, than I did as a kid. you know, I meet so many people, and one of my best experiences there is going every second summer to Perthshire, to Blair Athol. They have a biennial scout camp in Blair Athol Castle grounds every second year since 1946. And it's a fantastic, fantastic camp. I've been going since 2006. And that's one of the highlights of my life. And in fact, that was where I wrote my first big poem, was there in 2012. And I was asked if I wanted a slot at the staff club. And I said, oh, that'd be great. And back then I used to write everything in blue books, blue notebooks. I don't necessarily just stick with blue anymore. But I had this idea that what if I could get all of the scouts, bearing in mind they come from all countries around the world, about 30 countries from around the world each time. And I simply asked them all to fill in the blank of the sentence, I am a scout, I am fill in the blank. And I got hundreds of these responses in 2012, hundreds. And I sat with some scouts and, you know, we played with them, we messed around with them, put them in different orders and things. And from that, I ended up writing a poem called I Am a Scout. And that was the very first big performance piece I did. That predates the Sainsbury's performance, and that was 2012. And ever since then, I guess I performed with the Scouts as well. I've tried to capture camps in poems. I love it. I love it. And something I'll have to say, campfire. Do you know what I love about a campfire? I love that a campfire is in a circle. I love that you're all part of it. One of my poems is called Life is a Campfire, and it talks about the idea that we are all connected. I think that's something I see in the Scouts. You know, there's so many opportunities to thrive and find yourself.
Fantastic. And are you still involved with the local Scout group?
Yeah, sort of. So my role at the moment, particularly in lockdown, has been a bit more of an unusual one. And I suppose it's been a sort of self-chosen, in that I offered to any and all Scout groups, if they wanted, I would read them for their virtual camps, because of course we've all been doing camps from home from the last a year and a half almost at this point. And I offered them stories from my sleeping bag. And I did for several groups. So at this point, we've reached like hundreds, if not thousands of Scouts through this. We even managed to get some over in Canada, one in America. We've had some involvement with the Netherlands. That was fun, and it was good choosing these stories to try and fit with themes. And I felt that just allowed me to keep involved in some way, to contribute something. I've just marveled at how many leaders and kids have managed to keep things going through what has been a really rough time. To be able to meet through a screen to do something that's normally so physical, like performing, but in a way almost much harder. How do you give them that adventure through a screen? And that was just my little effort to try and help out in the best way I could.
You've also become pretty well known for the videos of your own poems. When did you start doing that?
Yeah, so this is sort of bringing us back up to 2020, where we left off the story. I realized very quickly that unfortunately I would have to cancel all of my tour and all of the gigs that I had booked up for that whole year. And that was frustrating because I just finished all the planning stages of the tour. The poster was finished. I was so excited with the new logos. Everything was ready to go, and it would have launched 2 weeks after we closed it all down. And I realized quickly that if I sat and did nothing, I would lose an opportunity. And the first one came about because I thought it might be fun to go and visit people's holiday destinations, which was the back garden that everybody had been using, a sort of Costa del back garden, if you will. And the first poem simply came about a very sort of childish verse. There was nothing highbrow about it. And I simply did an open call and said, if there are people with back gardens, I'd love to feature you in a video called In Costa del Back Garden, where you read a verse of my poem from your back garden. And I did it. It had a good response. And I thought I could do some of my other poems in this sort of style. And probably the most notable ones include When We Heard 2020, which was my culmination, if you like, of what had occurred in 2020. I felt very much people seemed to be talking about all the things that they had seen through the year. For me, it was very much about the stuff we heard, particularly birdsong. How many people have we spoken to who have said, we heard the birds last year more than we've ever heard birds before? Certainly the sound of the blue tits in the wee nest we've got, that's the sound that's going to stick with me. So I wrote one called When We Heard 2020, and another one, which I know you're a big personal fan of, Douglas, is Are We Not? which is my big poem, a sort of rallying cry for Scotland, and dealing with all these like gross stereotypes of Scotland and Scottish people. And I was so determined I wanted to do that well. And I was really lucky to work with the Wee Theatre Company up in Perth. They commissioned a video on that piece, which was great. And it was so much fun. It was just an absolute riot. And it's great when these are well received.
You also get quite a bit of help with the videos from your father. Do you know, see the main videographer?
Yeah, so big kudos at this point. Thank you to my dad for being my cameraman for, I think, every video I have done. And if we're saying that, when we definitely need to do a shout out for Mum, who came to do the lighting for Matt O'Shanta, which was by far our most technical and longest film shoot so far. And we just didn't have enough hands between us. And that was a really good, fun family night, actually, was filming that. I think the three of us got on really well in hard conditions. But yeah, they've been a great help to me this time. So a big thank you to both of them.
Any other members of the family you want to give a mention to?
And that's it. There are no pets in the house, so no pets are ever featured in any of these videos.
Fantastic. How about we finish off this part of the podcast with maybe a few verses from one of your own pieces?
Yeah, okay. So maybe just because it's sitting to my hand, maybe I'll read something from Cathedral Sky.
Lovely.
Cathedral Sky deals with lots of different skies. Skies up in Caithness, skies on the west coast and the east coast. And because I was self-publishing it, I was in charge of what went where and all that. You know, I was editing myself, and I'd sent it off to the printers. And I remember being down Prestwick Shore and thinking, oh no, I've not said something that I really need to say. And in fact, it might be the very thing that I've written this book to say, and I don't think I've said it. So I contacted the printer and said, am I too late to change something? And they were like, you've got 48 hours. So this was one of the very final things that I wrote for it. So maybe I'll read it to you. And it comes from something that I do all the time. I don't know if when you're wearing your shoes, particularly trainers, if you get stones stuck in the grooves of the shoes. And I love how satisfying it is to prize those stones out of the shoe. And to me, that was a poem. So
when I was a Boy Scout, we used to have a special tool that we used for that.
Yeah, I think we've gone, but I've no idea what you would call that. I bet it has a name. It has a name. I hope if it doesn't have a name, we should, as poets, name it, I think. But it's based on that. And this really is the big moment, the finale moment. In fact, it's this image from the end of Cathedral Sky. It's called, "Oh, my gentle raider. Oh, my gentle raider. See the stones you've stolen in your shoes. Did you leave any on the path? Come, gouge them from your soul. Prize each painful pebble from the grooves and thumb their sharpest edges down. Heap them here, all of them. Ah, it seems you have a mountain too. Ascend this rocky road you've built and know each step is made on top of all that came before you. Felled trees and broken wings as well. Oh, how light you must feel after setting down a mountainside. Please, leave it here and journey on. Ignore its cracking crust, pass by its bursting buds. Let go. The mountain is no longer yours. Concern yourself with now. Spread your arms beneath the sanguine sky and to the wild wind proclaim, I came. I came."
Excellent. Well done. Well, you got us started in Burns when you told us about your Sainsbury's experience, but let's get into it in a bit more detail. And I'll hand over to Jim to get you into a conversation about that.
Thanks.
It's quite obvious, Simon, from what you've said, that Tam O'Shanta in particular has had a large impression on you. What about the rest of Burns's works?
Yeah, A good question, because I think for many years I left it at that. I left the exploration at Tam O'Shanter, and if anything, at that sort of first half, that abridged first half. It was only really last year that I got my claws and my teeth into Tam O'Shanter, and I'm sure we'll speak about Mat O'Shanter at some point. But the rest of the output, I guess as I come across it, I have now huge appreciation for it. If there's another poem that has always stood out as one that I've really enjoyed, and I've enjoyed the idea behind, it's Scots Were Hay. That one has such a, it has such a power behind it, and I love teaching that one in schools. He's just a master, isn't he? He has this way of capturing you in with the music of the piece without ever just being too much. I was watching one of your recent episodes, and I think it was Robin said that he's the boss. He knows what he's doing. You feel safe, and yet somehow always excited, always wanting to know more. Even in the quiet poems, one of the poems I'm enjoying at the moment, for a few different reasons, including Jackie Kay's interpretation of it. I love John Anderson, My Joe. I love how much that achieves in so few lines. For me, I love when poetry can be epic and minuscule. I think Burns is great with that. Epic and minuscule at the same time. We see that in so many of his works, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And John Anderson and Joe, which the original version was rather bawdy, and to take that and create it to a love song about, through your entire life, it's just wonderful. And when it's sung properly, as it often is, it's great. And I can understand the influence on you, because you're a bit of a romantic at heart, I think. However, in relation to Burns, you said you weren't taken well at school. I take it you would be basically forced into the Burns, the primary school Burns stuff early in your life.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say one of the things there that I now strive to do as a teacher is I strive not to be the teacher that then enforces that, which is why in so many of the things, not just in poetry, I try to care about things. I think when we see people care about things, it's so much easier to care about it yourself. So my example of this is I love an artist, an illustrator called Sean Tan. And I speak to him, to everyone about him at the moment. I just think he's amazing. And the number of people that have said, oh, you've gone on for this about 20 minutes. But I'm actually fine with that, because you care about it so much that I'm starting to care, even though I don't know what you're talking about. And I see that with Burns, the very best Burnsians, the ones that make you just feel like, Jim, you're a great example, because you see that in your book, and I'm sure, again, this will come up with Mat O'Shanter, but you care. You aren't just wowed by it. You don't just enjoy it. You care about these things. So I want to be the teacher that cares, rather than the teacher that says, right, okay, oh, it's January. Oh, you know what that means? Burns Festival time. And it's got to be, it's got to be the same poem that we do every year. Oh, it can't be one of those ones that not everybody knows. It's got to be one of those big poems. No. Let's find the good stuff. Find the stuff that's good for the kids. That's my philosophy now, at least.
You've mentioned Mat O'Shanter a couple of times, and I was one of the fortunate few that got the first, I suppose, public performance of, and I was absolutely wowed at the time. And I think you need to tell people about Mat O'Shanter and just what the essence of it is.
Okay, well, the origin story itself is nice. Tamfest, which runs every year, a local festival, all to do with Robert Burns, particularly Tam O'Shanter. They had said, would I like to do something, and commissioned me to do a piece for the festival for 2020. And I had no ideas what to do. In fact, for the longest period of time, I was sure I was going to do something about nanning. And if you remember, that was the first time I contacted you, Jim, and it was via Douglas. I was very confused because online, as we discovered, and you have discovered, nanny is referred to as Nanny D, I think, quite often online. And there's no basis for this. And that was my question, was where had this come from, And the more that I was thinking about it, the more I was like, okay, what is it I want to say? What is it I need to say about Tam O'Shanter? What is this new piece? And at the exact same moment, I got kind of ill last year for a good sort of 2-week period, and it just wiped me out. And at the exact same moment, Jim, through my letterbox, you put your book In and Out of Tam O'Shanter, which is sitting on my shelf behind me here. And I read that book while I was ill, and I was like, gosh, I like Tam O'Shanter already, but by golly, there's so much in here. It's so alive. That poem is so rich. And I was like, okay, here's the thing. In schools, it's hard to teach Tam O'Shanter to all ages because it deals with two things that can be kind of hard to teach: alcohol and lusting over young women. That's hard. How do you square that in schools? And I thought, okay, I'm going to have a go. I'm going to write my Tam O'Shanter, which hopefully is reverent to the original, but it's mine, and it includes parts of me, and it tells the essence of that story for a modern audience today, where they'll listen, where the language is enough that they can stay on board. Because I think most Burnsians would agree that even with the best performance, it can be so hard with being such a long poem. It can be hard to have a brand new audience here catch everything on that first listen. And especially for kids, that's something I was wanting us to do. And I was like, okay, I'm going to try it. So while I was ill, over a 48-hour period, I had my own go at writing a 228-line poem called Matt O'Shanter. And that was how I stumbled upon the idea of setting it here, now, today.
Well, I'm not going to spoil it at all for the audience, because I think I just loved it, and I mean, I'm a Burnsian through and through, as everybody knows, but I just love that interpretation of it, and I just particularly, I'm not going to even mention the parts I really like because that would spoil some of it, but I would encourage everybody out there to write it. Have you ever thought about getting involved with Burns institutions or organisations at all?
Well, I have to say a few have tried to get their claws into me in recent years. I think after some of the events that Douglas has got me involved in, I don't know what my thoughts on that are. I don't know. I like swanning into all these different little groups that I've been involved in and things. I like performing at them. I don't know. It's a hard question. And I know that it has been asked and it has been said, obviously, age and youth, and that so many of the clubs are skewed in that there are not so many younger members. I don't know if I'm treading on eggshells here, but I mean, I think not many people would say otherwise. Certainly of the events I've attended, I tend to be quite young in comparison. I don't know. Maybe that's a question I'm interested in your answers on. Where do you think Burns clubs are going? Do they survive forever? Do they change?
I think one of the issues you've raised, and that's in terms of age, and not just for Burns clubs, for all clubs, because golf clubs now are dead easy where you waited. I mean, Brassy, you would wait 10 years to get in. Now you can walk in the door. It's just, that's a fact of life. But I think if I can use Newcomic as an example for you, you wouldn't be the youngest in the room by some considerable distance there. And you would find as you looked around that the committee members who were organising it were mostly well under 50, well under, 30s, 40s. And the club would have people there from 18 onwards. So for me, it's about relevance. And if the club is relevant and the organisation is relevant, then people will join and people will get involved. It's as simple as that. And I think
probably related in some way to what I was saying about making the Burns poetry relevant to those school kids rather than just pushing upon them these verses year after year, making it so it is relevant, that they want to.
Yeah, one of the issues with that is understanding, because the language has changed completely.
Yeah.
So you're using Tam O'Shanter, and I mean, and having looked at Tam O'Shanter as a poem, the Haley Table, which is what, about 12, 14 lines from start to finish, with 2 deleted lines, which nobody ever talks about. But that alone was 4 or 5 months' work. But the bottom line to it is, I think there is relevance in Burns clubs. I think they're important, and I think that the umbrella organisations are important. And I honestly think it's important that people yourself at least join a club and be prepared to commit to doing stuff at that club. You know, because a bun supper, I mean, you'd be brilliant in bun suppers. Have you done any?
Yeah. I quite often do a burn supper, and I mean, Tam is my party piece now at these things. I think I very rarely do. I'm not sure if I've ever done one where Tam has not been my party piece at these.
Well, I mean, that's no strange, because it's normally Holy Willie and Damajanta, along with a murder title of a poem to a haggis. But I mean, that's the kind of the usual stuff. And I might be preaching to converted here, but I'd encourage you to get involved. But other than that, where do you go from here in terms of burns and your own poetry?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've been involved in this past year is with North Ayrshire, in schools over there, and their literacy officer came up with this idea called Story Stories. And Story Stories was a three-pronged stream, if you like, 3 streams, and it dealt with witchcraft in Kilwinning. It dealt with Eglinton Park, particularly the failed tournament, and also St. Innan. And we worked through screens with Garnock Academy over there, and it was good. It was interesting. It was hard working through screens with them, but the idea was to do a history project that was to do with all this literacy, taking it off the page. And it went well, and we've been asked to create a new stream, and the stream is to do with burns. And I was given 3 workshops, and for those 3 workshops I chose to do people, places, and things. And that was interesting, because that was one of the first times I had taken something that I was unfamiliar with in burns and started to teach it. That was actually why John Anderson, my Joe, was one of the things I'd been working on recently. And I love Jackie Kay. There was, I think it's called 10 Contemporary Poets Respond to Burns. It was a project maybe about a decade ago. And I love her response to Burns's poem, John Anderson, my Joe, Fearing, the poem she writes. And I think in my own work, I've done that. So this past Burns year, I did the reply from Willie Wassell's wife. And that was like a complete reply to Burns's words. And so I think my answer to the question is continuing to do that, continuing to respond to his poems with mine and finding these little quirky ways to tell more stories. You know, so many poets do it, but I still think there are so many things out there to do with them. So I think that's my answer. And finally, maybe I would say there that the poem I did last year, quite early on, I think for National Poetry Day actually, was on Poet's Path. And that one, I set it on Poet's Path over in Alloway and spoke about Burns and legacy. And that's something I think I'm taking into my practice. All of the poetry workshops I've delivered this year, particularly in 2021, all of them, I build on the idea that we're passing on poetry. We're passing on the pens. So the pens that came from Robert Burns and passed on to, you know, more contemporary people like Edwin Morgan, passing on to Jackie Kay, passing on to me, passing on to the pupils of the future. I think that's where I'm using Burns in my work, the idea of legacy and building on Scottish poetry. We are the new pens in this big stream.
Would that be an appropriate time for us to get you to give us at least an excerpt from Mato Shanta, and perhaps give us the story that you are telling, if you're not going to cover the whole poem?
Yeah, so let's have a think about a nice wee extract then that we can look at. I've got it on my screen here so I could refer to it. So Matt O'Shanta takes place in Prestwick, which is where I'm from, and Matt is a quite unruly kid. He stays out late from the summer right through till the next summer. He never comes home on time. He's quite the scallywag, is what I'm saying. He's quite a scallywag, and he's not so nice. And I guess Jim was trying to avoid twists later on, and I too will try and avoid the twist. But there's a bit later on where I do make one big change from Burns later on, and I was very nervous that very first night I read it to Jim and the cronies there. I was very nervous how that would be received by the Burnsians, because it is a big turn from the original poem. And I think, Jim, I think your comment was that was like one of your favorite bits, because I'd done the thing that Burns hadn't in that original verse. And why had I done it? Well, we already spoke earlier about my accent and that bit of bullying. I brought myself to the poem. So that was hopefully setting it up for the tale. How about if I set the scene of the evening, but to our tale? It's that bit, you know, in the poem Tam O'Shanter, this is the scene when they're in the pub and the beer's flowing and they're having a rare old time and Suitor Johnny is there and they're having a great time. Maybe I'll set the story there and finish with the weather turning and things getting pretty bad, the nightmare beginning, which it would of course equate to getting on the horse and yikes a Rooney is around the corner. Is that a good setup? Is that where we're going?
Sounds great.
So, extract from Mat O'Shanter. But to your tale. Yin shining night, in early evening after light, Matt and his pals had found a ledge upon the prom's most northern edge. A park that used to be a pool, and each they sat as king of cool and stuffed themselves on fizzy sweets and other such ill-gotten treats, and drooned them off this motley crew with mony a bottle o' iron brew. They screamed and sang and didn't care. Ian played a game of truth and dare and walked the wall and wheeled a boot, not noticing wi' every shout the crowd had thinned to say goodbye. The sun had slipped to lowest sky. But these young lads, least they were living, give what you can, and they were given, as if to give means more to take. They gied themselves the peace to break. They are were kings who'd rob a crown, these pirates o' old Prestwick town. But pleasures, if these pleasures be, like the waves upon the sea, that blaze as they come into land, then soak themselves into the sand. Or like the great horizon line, whose joy exists in far, not fine. Or like the loot a pirate plunders. Just why do caves need gifts, one wonders. Naked can stretch out time or tide. The hour approaches, Matt maun ride. The sun had gone and long by then, and no a child knew where or when, except to say they should disband. The wizard hour was new at hand. The dark had grown in secret places, and knew it poured into their faces. Beyond the shore the firth did widen, and offered up a great Poseidon o' a storm. His friends departed, but Matty's nightmare just had started.
No,
Excellent. If that doesn't encourage people to seek out that poem, to hear the whole thing, nothing will. But where can they find it? Is it on Simon Lamb Creative?
Yeah, you can find it on Simon Lamb Creative, which is the website www.simonlambcreative.co.uk, or on my YouTube channel, which is approx 21 words. But I think that was kind of maybe a nice extract, because, you know, you got those little bits of burns you could hear in there, those little almost like you know, like those tent pegs of the poem holding it up, those little quoted lines. And that's how I ended up writing it. I knew those little lines that I wanted to get through all the way through. And that's what got me there. And it also gives me that one of my favorite rhymes, which is, beyond the shore the firth did widen and offered up a great Poseidon.
I was just, the first time I heard that, and I always say that Burns shows off with his knowledge of Greek and Roman mythology. And to stick that in, and to be honest with you, and I'm not just saying this, people, the bottom line to it is, if Burns was alive and heard that, he'd be roaring with laughter. He would really, really have enjoyed it. And it's only someone who was a bit staid in terms of poetry wouldn't enjoy it, to be honest with you, Simon. So I would encourage everybody to have a wee look.
Well, we'll try and remember and put a link on at the end of this podcast that takes people to that, or at least gives them the reference for Simon Lamb Creative. So that was excellent, Simon. Now, Jim, we're kind of running out of time, so I don't know if there's anything else that we want to talk to Simon about.
Just one question, Simon, what's next?
What's next? So currently I'm working on a few projects, but I think that probably the one I'll mention is that I'm now trying to build up enough written poems that rather than another pamphlet, I would be able to create a collection. And hopefully this time someone would like to take it on and publish a written collection, because there's such a variety in the verses, and it's not always the type of poetry that I'm seeing published. A lot of modern poetry is very issues based. I think it's fair for me to say that, whereas a lot of my poetry is much more beautiful and hopeful and place based, and so much Scottish stuff. You know, we spoke recently in this conversation about the passing of the pen, and the more that I've written, the more I realize that, yikes, I'm writing about local stuff. I'm writing poems about Cumbria. I'm writing poems that are set here down on the shore. I'm writing poems that are set in Caithness. Everything is grounded here because it's home. You know, I think we write about home so much. So that's where I am, is with all this writing of all these different ideas. And it was really exciting to win earlier on this year the Robert Burns Well Federation's poetry competition with the Working Birds. So poems like that would be in it. That's where I'm at the moment, is throwing all of these into a Word document and hoping that there's something there.
Sounds particularly exciting. I look forward to it. I thought you would have said that what's coming next is your big birthday, because apparently we had to reschedule because we were going to be clashing with our original date on a big birthday. Yeah. Is there a big party planned?
There is not a big party planned, but I'm sure that the day will be lovely. I'm going to go on holiday for the week before it, over to the East Coast, see some friends over there for a week, and then I'll come back and hopefully have a nice old time here, maybe a meal out or something, maybe write a poem to celebrate the occasion. Who knows? One of my favorite titles of a poem is The Boy Who Circumnavigated the World on His 11th Birthday. And I'm wondering whether I need to write the sequel of the man who circumnavigated the world on his beep birthday.
Well, we'll leave it to the audience to have a wee guess as to how big the birthday is. Okay. And we'll see if anyone comes up with the answer. I'm sure they can put it in the comments field on either YouTube or Facebook. See who guesses correctly. Simon, that's been tremendous. I love chatting to you. Thank you for telling us about your life with Robert Burns. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.